Hello there, it's Josh here from Racing to Profit. I hope you can hear me loud and clear and see me in the bottom right hand corner as always. I thought it was probably about time that I did some reflection and thinking about various results and my own approach to race analysis over kind of recent weeks and months. And I thought it might be good if I tried to pull those thoughts into a video for you. Um, and with some examples, which I'll kind of flick through 4 or 5 horses and races that I've kind of looked at and tipped in kind of in the last couple of weeks, really, and look at where I think I've gone wrong and what kind of things I can be doing better in the future. The context for all of that is the free tips and the free tips and the blog posts, and the fact that if I'm being brutally honest with myself, I am not progressing, and I'm a bit of a relentless perfectionist. I always think I can be doing better. I always think I can be attempting to solve the puzzle in a kind of more successful way, I suppose, and the results and my performance can always be improved. And I suppose the day that I stop thinking that, the day that I no longer have the drive within horse racing and kind of race analysis, the day that that drive stops is probably the day to give up, because I am a believer that you can always be better and should always be wanting to improve on your past performance. And if I'm being blunt, if I look at the previous kind of 2, 3 years of the free tips when I've kind of been doing them properly, as you know, I focus on handicap chases, kind of 3 mile plus, class 4 and higher, generally the odd class 5 chase if I'm probably feeling bored, but the success isn't too bad in those. There hasn't been any progress on the profit front. We've gone 2016, we made 75 points. Last year, the whole of 2017 was 79 and a half, roughly. And that's not progress. That's 2 years of pretty much the same. And I think from kind of memory, 2015 was probably a similar level, if not slightly worse. It definitely wasn't any better than that. So that's the context. I can clearly be doing things better because I'm not progressing. I haven't yet broken the 100 point barrier. It's important not to be too kind of hard on myself. The kind of return on investment over those 2 years is, I think, somewhere between kind of 40 and 50%. Um, Most tips are kind of 1 point win. There's a few kind of the odd 2 point every now and then, and the odd 1 point each way. But the return on investment is pretty good. I only really care for profit and return on investment. But having said that, I would like to drive up my win percentage and kind of return on bets. It kind of hovers around the 10 to 12% win strike rate, which is fine. But that does mean every now and then I will and have hit numerous losing runs within the kind of 20 to 40 range. That's just a kind of fact of life with my approach, which I don't mind, because I am generally looking at horses that are kind of 8 to 1 or bigger. I am, especially at weekends, focused on some of the most competitive racing there is going over jumps, kind of 12 to 14 plus runners, kind of class 2, grade 3, big field handicaps, and they are tough. It means getting them right is more enjoyable, but there can be some fallow periods in between. And having reflected on the last kind of couple of weeks and looked through a few results and thought about my own process, I think there are some things I can improve on. I've ticked around to 4 minutes here. I've got a clock in my top right hand corner. I'm not going to pretend that this is going to be a short video. It will be as long as it is. It would be good to keep it under 30 minutes will be the target. But I'm 5 minutes in. I'll try and rattle through and get the rest done in the next kind of 15 or 20 minutes. The aim, hopefully, is that you find something I say of interest, something that you can take away, something that makes you ponder possibly your own approach to racing, whether or not there is anything I kind of talk about that could help you improve your own punting or improve how you look at the race. So yes, with that said, the chasing game in front of you is just a basic Word document. This is repeated below the video, and there's a link where you can kind of download it yourself. There's kind of 5 areas that I thought about that I kind of need to improve on. I've kind of turned it back to basics in terms of handicap chases and those over kind of 3 miles or further. Uh, Breaking it down more methodically and making sure I go through these 5 points kind of step by step. These are kind of on top of, or maybe underpinning, however you want to think about it, kind of general race analysis where I would look through every horse using GGs, which I'll go on to in a minute, and horse race based profiling tool to look through every runner to get a feel for them. But underpinning that basic kind of analysis should be these 5 points kind of at the top of my head, and the first four in particular. The first one is pace, and there's kind of examples of me not doing this or not following my instinct all the way through when I get onto those examples in a moment. So these 5 points are, I suppose, a way of finding a horse as a starting point or to have a closer look at, and are all very, very important in helping to build up the bigger picture. It's this kind of thing is second nature to me now if I put my mind to it. But I do need to put my mind to it, which is why I've kind of written it down because I thought it would help me, if nothing else, if some of you or many of you watch this video and don't find it useful at all. So here's 5 things which I will be thinking more of, which I've mentioned before explicitly, mainly I think over probably the last year or 18 months. And you'll be watching this and I read through some of this in a moment thinking, well, that's bloody obvious, Josh. Have you not thought about that? But it's not thinking about these issues in a kind of clear, concise, smacking myself around the face type way when I analyse a race, which has been the problem, I think. So we'll start off with the first one, which is pace. Could there be a lone front runner? The best place to be in a handicap chase, we all know this, arguably the best place to be in many a race, is at the front, a jockey able to go their own pace, set their own fractions, and particularly in handicap chases, able to get into a jumping rhythm and do their own thing and wind the clock up and wind the race up and wind the pace up from the front. If the horse has the ability to stay there, that's the kind of next point I'm looking for. I should start any chase I look at by going to a pace map. There are free decent pace maps on At The Races. I personally use GG's Gold, and working out, is there a horse that's a lone front runner, or is there a horse that could be a lone front runner, and do they have the ability to stay there? Because any horse like that should be marked up. Clearly, you can then go and look at pace, look at price, and look at the rest of their profile and different things, and whether or not you actually think they'll stay there, etc. But that's a very good starting point. And any horse that I think could actually lead, or be in kind of a wave of kind of 2 or 3 horses at the front, I should give more focus and attention to. There's only a safe speed that you can kind of jump, really, and often before I've thought in the past, well, there's loads of pace on paper here, they're going to go far too quick and fall into a hole. A, sometimes yes, that does happen. B, sometimes it actually doesn't happen and all the horses they find a natural kind of rhythm. Or C, it doesn't happen at all and there actually a horse does end up front running, and you know, there's plenty there that you can't predict and it is tricky. I suppose the Welsh National this year would be an example of 4, 5 or 6 jockeys really doing too much at the front, all wanting to lead, no one relenting, and after about a mile they've kind of all ruined their chance and they stay there and then slowly dropped out during the rest of the, well, during the final mile, I suppose, mile and a half. But that's important. Pace, 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 pace. And when I talk about that, I'm mainly focusing on, is there a horse that can front run over fences if they can get into a jumping rhythm? It is so hard for horses at the back, unless they have an absolute ton in hand and can jump at speed. and the kind of progressive, it's very hard to pull back a horse that's racing promptly or leading if they keep going the same pace, because the only way that a horse in behind can catch a handicap chaser who's in front and who's going the same pace or even faster, because the jockey's very good from the front, the only way they can catch them is if they pick up speed themselves. Now that horse either A, might not have the class or the ability to do that, their legs simply won't go fast enough, or B, they do go fast enough, or they are picking up speed, but they have to jump at a faster pace than they either may be used to or haven't actually been jumping at in the race before. And because they have to go a faster pace to close the horse in front, that can obviously lead to errors and mistakes. An example of that, if you want one that I don't cover in this video, would be Attention Please at Musselburgh. You can go back and watch that race if you want, find the horse. The winner, trained by Lucinda Russell from memory, got a very good ride from Derek Fox. He was a bit more aggressive. He got first run on Attention Please, who had won over 26 and 25 furlongs at 2 runs before. He was over 23 furlongs here at Musselburgh, and he was only starting to get rolling as he was approaching 2 out, but he approached 2 out, I think, probably a bit quick, or he hadn't been used to jumping that quick in the race at that point. The jockey was getting after him, and jumping at that speed, or knowing that he had to go quicker, ended up with him hitting the deck. So you've got all those things to consider, and why front running is good. And there are many a decent jockey from the front, especially over fences, the likes of Danny Cook, Daryl Jacob, Paddy Brennan, to name but a few. Sean Bowen's very good over fences, Will Kennedy, etc. So yes, that's the kind of pace point. If there are a few pace pushers on paper, could one of them see them off early? And I will refer to the man from Manila, who's one of the examples where that is more kind of prevalent, I think, as an example. And I'll kind of go on to that about why might, if you've got 3 or 4 front runners you think in a race, why might only one stay there? Are the other horses out of form? Are they changing trip? Especially if they're moving up in trip, you might not be so aggressive. That can depend, obviously, and that isn't kind of a black and white thing. But yeah, if a horse is kind of going up in trip and stamina is unsure, might have been front running over 2.5 miles, say, they might be ridden a bit more patiently, or the horse might not be suited to conditions. They might be a regular front runner who has never run well on heavy ground and all of a sudden gets heavy ground. And like I said, they might be out of form. So there could be reasons why you might have 3 or 4 front runners on paper, but actually only one of them is going to stay there. And that man from Manila, the man from Manila, race at Wincanton is an example of that, and I'll get onto that in a moment. And then you've got ideas of why may a horse now front run. Change of headgear is a big one. If you spot a horse that might now have first time blinkers, first time cheek pieces, or a visor or something, there's been a few examples of that headgear being attached to a horse and it having the kind of flight mentality, fright and then flight, where they're kind of scared into the bridle a bit and just keep going. I haven't focused on Milan's bar as an example in this particular video. Maybe the scars and the pain is too deep, but he would be an example of not reacting to cheek pieces in the Welsh National and getting absolutely run off his feet. But then at Warwick, the blinkers just sparked him up, and Bryony Frost did the right thing, booted him to the front. It really focused him, and the kind of race was over, to my eyes, a kind of couple of fences in, if not before, because that's the best that horse had ever travelled in his life. So there's a reason why a change of headgear might mean a horse runs to the front. There was a horse for Graham McPherson, whose name escapes me, but I can still picture the race. It was at Chepstow either last season or the year before. 50-1. He had blinkers on for the first time. He had a jockey on, actually, had been aggressive before on horses. Booted to the front, a lack of pace in the race, and he just made all and absolutely had the time of his life. So that's something to think about. Change of jockey, especially if the jockey is known for kind of being aggressive and front running. Henry Brook is one of those, and something a jockey to know. I've noted a few times how he kind of jumps on a horse and suddenly rides them aggressively, or more aggressively than they have been before. Sky Full of Stars at Ayr, on when he won a couple of starts ago, would be an example of that. He'd been held up under other jockeys. They changed tactics. Henry Brook jumped on board. He didn't essentially make all, but he was kind of second, I think, all the way around, and he actually took it up a good mile from home. So that's an example, a change of jockey or jockeys that might want to ride more aggressively. Distance move I've discussed about. If you've got a horse, especially if one is kind of dropping in trip and they think they stay further. Well, if you've got a horse you think that stays further, you are best being aggressive with them and using their stamina and try and get them into a rhythm and a pace where they will just keep going and might stretch others. And inexperience. Now, this is one which the win of the Tizard horse, which is another example and race that I'll get onto at the moment in a moment in the Peter Marsh chase. There was an inexperienced chaser, and Harry Cobden said something interesting after the race about wanting to give him a clear sight of his fence, I think, or wanting to race promptly and make sure he gets in a jumping rhythm. So that's an example why an inexperienced chaser, especially in these big field handicaps, you do not want to bury a kind of novice or a lightly raced chaser within a big field surrounded by kind of 8, 9, 10 other horses with walls of horses in front, horses at the side, unsighted from their fences. The best place to be for them is going to be prominent, is going to be the space of their fences, either kind of leading or out wide, say. So that's another thing for me to kind of think about as my screen goes black. We're back on there. Trainer form and stats, and this is something which I really should hammer in my head and doesn't take as much explanation, but specifically I'm looking at horses where the trainer is in red hot form. I use GG's form symbols for that, which I'll get into in a moment, but it's an idea. Clearly you can look at trainer form in many different free resources as well, about the trainer being in red hot form and giving more attention to those where everything the trainer or a majority of the horses the trainer has run, certainly in the last 2 weeks, seems to be running well or seems to be winning. I need to look closer at those runners. There's a few examples I'll get on to in a moment. Also, are there any standout stats to support a case in the way, and specifically trainer stats at the distance, at the class, at the track with the jockey? I kind of did a bit of that when I tipped Bywise a couple of weeks ago in terms of the stats and the record when Evan Williams booked Leighton Aspel, who he hardly had never done, but their record in handicaps was standout and was one of the reasons why I started to take a closer look at Bywise. So trainer form, I'm talking about positive, good trainer form there, when, you know, a trainer running the stable cat would probably win. Last time out winners, which horses are evidently in form? This is something I need to whack and hammer again into my head. I've just done, actually, or in the process of doing some kind of research within my members club, which looks at handicap chasers that won last time out. But if you're watching this and you have system building software or your horse race base, do take a look at handicap chasers since, say, the start of 2013, in the last 5 years. Handicap chasers that won last time out. And a hint might be to look at those that ran ran recently and haven't had too long a break from their last run, and at certain classes, and looking at that pool of horses, about 30% win and 50% win or place, which is quite a good starting point for finding bets. And I really do need to take a closer look at last time out winners. It's too easy to look at a last time out winner and think, oh, well, automatically they're not going to follow up. And that lazy analysis can creep in because you're looking for something to improve. Well, the last time out winner clearly can still be improving. And again, I might be kind of teaching some of you to suck eggs with that comment. I'm more teaching myself. But I have got lazy and not put enough focus on handicap chasers that won last time out, that ran recently and are evidently in good nick. And as a starting point or a focus point, you would do a lot worse than actually just focusing your betting on last time out handicap chase winners in certain conditions. Number 4, are there any thoroughly unexposed horses in the race? And this actually is the kind of Tizard winner of the Peter Marsh hammering at my head again. Looking for horses not proven in conditions who could relish them and take a big step forward. Which horses have the most interesting profile? Is there one or two horses in there? The lurking could be anything horse. Note them, study them, especially for decent price, and the kind of examples, or a couple of them I'll get on to in a moment, kind of help demonstrate that. Assess the strengths of the market leaders. This is something I need to do be better at. Are they still value? Should they be taken on? Should I leave the race? One of my biggest points that I need to work on and improve on is my ability at judging horses that are kind of 7-2, in the 7-2 to 11-2 range, which kind of is short for me, and therefore clearly I am losing a lot of winners, or not focusing on a lot of winners. It might be why my win strike rate kind of continues around the 10% as I look at horses that are 8-1 or bigger. So that's a clear area to improve on. Assessing the strength of the market leaders, and that's something I'll touch on as I look at some of the examples, or one of them in particular, in a moment. So pulling together some of those thoughts and adding some others to those bullet points at the bottom there. Areas that I need to improve on in 3-mile handicap chases, all those kind of 5 points above really, and making sure all of those factors are just kind of embedded in the brain, and they should become second nature. But you can get lazy and think this game's too easy at times and cut corners and rush in. And part of that is, if I just quickly go through those bullet points, assessing the top of the market is discussed. One of my issues with two horses in particular that I'll get onto soon, not being blinkered by one horse. Assume they may be rubbish and look again. And there's been a couple of races I've opened up because of performances that are lodged in my mind where I've been adamant to back a certain horse, and I think that has come at the detriment of analysing every other horse properly, really, in the race with my eyes wide open. I'm not necessarily annoyed I backed such horses, two of them in the examples in a moment. But I am annoyed that I think that blinkered me when it came to assessing the chances of others. Special attention on lightly raced could be anything types who may relish conditions and be ahead of the handicapper. And it's that age-old battle between been there and done it horses and those that haven't, who have proved they definitely don't handle conditions, or those who may relish them and improve for them. And they're the kind of different types and pools of horses that we're analysing every day, and in 3-mile plus handicap chases in particular, kind of twice, and especially the Peter Marsh, I've been focused and blinkered on looking for been there and done it horses. And I'll use that example. I won't talk about that just yet, but that's a clear example of where that thinking can mean that I completely overlook a decent priced horse that turned out to be well overpriced and hacked up. Of every horse you back and look at, whether unexposed or exposed, you should be asking the question, what is the horse doing differently? Could they improve for those changes? Many races are won by horses that are doing something completely different for the first time, indeed, or kind of haven't done that thing very many times. I don't know any numbers on that, but it's probably the majority of races actually are won by horses doing something differently for the first time, and that's something to keep in mind. I remember reading that in some book, I forget what, but that was a certain view, I think, of a possible Racing Post tipster, or better, or professional gambler anyway. But that's something to keep in mind. And as I touched on before, digging deeper into trainer stats for said horse within the race card and within a certain race. And again, that's an example that I'll touch on. So now my job, having talked about that for 23 minutes, where does the time go, is to bring all that to life. So I suppose that could be argued as looking like the end of part one as I tick around to 23 and a half, 24 minutes. Those 5 things to focus on. And now I'm going to try and bring that alive, all of those things I've just discussed, or some of them anyway, by looking at real life examples of races I tipped in, horses I backed, horses I didn't, and hopefully yeah, I can put some meat on the bones and some examples. So as I tick around the 24 minutes, that's kind of part one done. Do pause the video now if you want. Put the kettle on, make a cup of tea, and come back and press play again as I now dive and take us on a journey into 4 or 5 examples. And I will try and keep this kind of below 21 minutes. Where am I going? Hold on. Yes, so let me just skip over to Gigi's Goal, which is what I use for a lot of my analysis, along with Horse Race Base. Whereas both of those kind of sets of tools are the only things I use for race analysis, really, and a bit of informed speed ratings as well. But what do I want to talk about? I'm not here to talk about those things. Here's the first kind of race, a tipping race from the 18th of January, which was 6 days ago. And actually, all the examples I'm about to touch on are within the last 6 days. I'll try and remember all the things I want to kind of chat about for these various different horses. The first thing was I tipped Rathlin Rose. No problem with that. The error, I probably shouldn't have put 2 points to win on him. He was 5-1 in the morning. I judged that as being okay. I had the run of his Chepstow run in my mind. I thought that was decent. I thought it proved he handled heavy. I didn't mind kind of supporting him. 2 points proved to be foolish. And what I'm about to say I knew before the race, but maybe didn't think about them enough. And that is, he suddenly had a massive weight on his back, and I did not appreciate how heavy and how testing the ground could be. I should have looked at the weather reports more closely. I should have looked at the BHA website more closely and updates from the clerk of the course. Heavy rain, more rain on the day, just absolutely miserable. It was going to be a bog. You would need to be pretty special to carry a big weight. That's not saying that he wouldn't, but it was something he had to prove. And then, of course, there was the chance he had a hard race the last time. I watched the video. I watched how he jumped the last few and actually thought he jumped like a horse that still had some energy in his legs. It was an unknown whether or not that race left its mark. As it turned out, I think a combination of that and the weight probably did for him. He travelled and jumped okay on the whole, but turning in, it was clear that he wasn't going to get involved. So that's fine. There are a few things there just discussed that I can think about. In the context of price, hard race last time out, big weight in heavy. Top weights do have a decent enough record in heavy and testing ground, but there's always kind of races where that doesn't prove to be the case, and this was one of them. So thinking about that and thinking about, I suppose, is there any scenario where I can make a case carrying a lighter weight? And I kind of didn't give much truck to many of the others in here, and I was blinkered. I was blinkered by Rathlin Rose, I think. What should I have done, referring to some of those points I made before? Last time out winners. Now, if I had that, what I've just discussed as one of those points about which horses are in form, which chasers won last time out, I would have, or should have, given the man from Manila much more weight and consideration. This horse was 8-1 widely in the morning when I looked at the race. He was sent off kind of 5-1, 9-2. He was a horse, and I noted this before the race, but clearly not enough emphasis. He was a horse who had been transformed by the application of the blinkers to the tongue tie, and he'd suddenly stepped forward. He'd run well in a class 3. The form was boosted there. A winner had come out of that. One of those horses is him now. He'd run at Warwick over 24 furlongs, and a cardinal sin. I did not watch the video of that race. I read the write-up, ease near finish, 10 lengths there last. If you watch that video, my word, he won that race so easily. And yes, in my kind of write-up, I think for the race, I put he was against kind of old but consistent yardsticks, and Paddy Oscar was a consistent yardstick. And he had been improving for the blinkers. If I click on the horse and have a look here, he was he was 2 from 14 before this race, but he clearly, I think the blinkers had kind of stepped him up. He'd been bit in the doldrums. Soft ground, heavy ground, and the blinkers and the tongue tie combined seemed to transform him, and there was a case that there could still be more to come. It was also his first try with the blinkers and the tongue tie over 27 furlongs, but he was simply a handicapper in form, running at the top of his game. He couldn't have won more easily last time out. He was 10 lengths clear at the last. He was heavily eased from way out and kind of trotted over the line. There was every reason why £7-8 might not have been enough to stop him. When I combine that with the fact that he had 10 stone 10 on his back, minus the £7, so he had a featherweight in really grueling conditions. And no other horse came into this in as good a form. Cyclop came into inform, but he is an inconsistent sort. I noted that at the time, and I was quite happy to leave at his morning price. He'd never really followed up a really good win, kind of with another win from memory, and he had heavy ground to prove, which isn't a problem necessarily, but in my mind, he was short enough. Clearly, with all these examples, I'm saying and I'm discussing the winners with hindsight, but it is the only way to kind of look back and learn and try and get better. And there's things I should think about. Last time out winners being the main one, and he really did hack up. The other example from this race, as my kind of cogs in my brain tick around, and I try and remember the things that I wanted to discuss. Was pace. Now, if I look at this pace map within GG's, well, there was a chance he was going to lead, or certainly was going to be up there. And that gets to the point that I was making before about, are there horses which might look like they front run on paper, but might not actually give any kind of hassle. And he was prominent the last day at Warwick. He led for a long way the race before that. He led before that. He looked like the main consistent front runner. Royal Palladium came 70 odd days after his last run. There'd possibly been a niggle or an issue. He could race prominent, so I knew he'd kind of be up there, but wondered if he would give out at some point or whether or not he was in good enough form. He also wasn't proven on heavy from memory. I could be wrong, I won't go back, bother going back and looking, but he had ground to prove, and kind of stamina certainly in heavy and bottomless ground. And then we had Barton Gift, who was old, legs a bit slower these days, needs further, and he was, and his profile is etched on my brain, was 0 from 8, 0 places going into this on heavy ground in handicap chases. So there was a chance that he wouldn't handle heavy, and therefore he wouldn't be up the front for kind of the whole way round. He might be up there, but there was a chance the man from Manila, the younger legs, the inform horse, he could actually stay there and take up the lead quite away from home, which is what he eventually did. So there's a few things there with that particular example. And if I'm just clicking into next, but I'm trying to remember from before the race, I think I was blinkered also by the horses, the man from Manila's record in the class. But remember, I was in every right, really, to treat this horse like a new horse, because he'd never really run as well or consistently as he had been. He'd never been in that good of form. And the blinkers and the tongue tie clearly made all the difference. And I should have had faith that that run should have been kind of taken at face value and that he could build on it. I didn't. At the time, I was a bit too dismissive of him. So we can move on from that one. The next one, the Chepstow race, 19th of January. This was an example of me kicking myself, of me misjudging a horse at the top of the market, and my blatant lack of skill or ability at the moment of judging when a horse is 7-2, 4-1, 9-2 is actually value and should be 1.5 or 2 points shorter. Back to the Thatch was such horse. He was widely available at 4-1 in the morning, and he brought together a few things, and I was put off him by one reason, which was just stupid. But this is an example, to start with, I suppose, of a top-weighted horse in heavy ground having no problem at all. Now, as I look through this race, we had Grade A, who I was quite happy to take on. That's because his previous 2 wins were in small fields. He'd gone up £7 from that last run. I actually looked at that race last time out on the race card, and it was absolutely poor, really poor. And at his morning price, he was kind of 9-4, 2-1. He was one of those horses you should quite happily take on. And he was running at a completely different track here, on a galloping stiff track. Fontwell's fairly stiff, but figure of 8, completely different kettle of fish, and suddenly had 10 runners. They crawled there. He kind of made virtually all, and went and dictated his own steady pace. And that is a sign that the form might not actually stand up when push comes to shove in a deeper race, run at a stronger gallop. And that is what happened here at different tracks. I was happy to take on Grade A, and the rest of them, excluding the Newland horse and Back to the Thatch, were all older, been there and done it horses. They were all, you were wanting or expecting another horse to recapture some former glories, and that one of its previous runs, maybe because its handicap mark had now come back down and they were running in ideal conditions, but you were hoping or expecting or banking on a horse that had previously done something, on repeating that performance, and that performance being good enough in this race. Now, all of those horses, bar Back to the Thatch and Grade Aid, were relying on there not being an unexposed, could be anything type in this race that could be way ahead of their handicap mark. That's what they were all relying on, and in the end, they did all bump into an unexposed one, and this one brought together plenty of things. I tipped Woodyer and Astigos dubious, as it turned out, on a few reasons. I won't go into thinking on those two necessarily. The visor, had there not been a headgear change on Woodyer, I don't think I'd have been tempted, but backing 12-year-olds and 11-year-olds, at least they were 10-1 plus, and I wasn't lured in at some stupid price like 4 or 5-1 with an 11 or 12-year-old. But Back to the Thatch, that's the horse I want to focus on. The first thing, trainer form. So this gets to that other point and those things that I've made notes on. Look at the horses where the yard is on fire. You had the Walford horse, but Umberto Dolavati has just been out of form for a little while, but his handicap mark is dropping like a stone, and he will make all at Exeter again at some point before he retires. In the mud, highly likely his handicap mark is dropping like a stone. So track him. He needs to find some form from somewhere, maybe some headgear put back on. But Back to the Thatch, we have Henry Daly. I use these figures and these indicators from Gigi's. 5+ runs in the last 40 days. That's what this green 14 means. Either a 20% win plus strike rate or a 51% win and place. And 30 days, 10+. Bloody blah. Now, it won't drop down because these are, I'm looking back at a kind of historical race card. Normally, I would drop down that and it would show me how many runners Daly's had, which it did do at the time, and I noted it. But basically, everything he was sending out was running fairly well and pretty consistently. We had Richard Johnson book that was noted. We've got a younger horse. He's fit. He only ran 19 days ago. He's clearly in good health. And he was unexposed, could be anything. He was 0 from 3, 1 place in handicap chase, but he'd shown some promise. Now, I do like when a trainer does not persevere with handicap hurdles with a potential chasing star. I do like it when they have a few runs in novice handicaps, maybe 1 or 2 runs in handicap hurdles, but then they're thrown over fences. That's an indication for me that the train has earmarked the horse as a future kind of chaser. They may have brought them along slowly, but they've ensured they haven't been stuck over handicap hurdles where they get used to jumping low and fast and need a completely different jumping technique from when they go over fences. So I do kind of like that, and that's something I kind of look for, especially with these unexposed types. And then we had to look at his form. So he ran in November, first run of the season. He was weakening. He probably needed the run. The odds would suggest that. He was weakening when he fell. He'd been kept to testing ground. He'd never really run on decent ground. I mean, it was a shocking run on decent ground there. That's an indication that the yard and the trainer thought he needed it hock deep. Otherwise, you simply wouldn't run them on, especially if it's a horse they quite like. Now, this is the run I should have focused on at Haydock. So we've got an unexposed horse. He fell. He was tiring the last day. He might have still needed the run here. Held up. Effort 5th 4 out. Headway into close 3rd 2 out. Won the approaching last, but every chance not fluent. Went 2nd early on running. Ridden and stayed on 1 pace. So he wasn't going backwards. Importantly, he was carrying 11 stone 12. That was evidence that he could carry weight, and I should have put more weight on that fact. He carried weight there. He wasn't going backwards. Whiskey Chaser was an informed horse, I think, when he bumped into him here. He was a hardy horse. He'd run at Haydock before. And this was over 23 furlongs. There's every chance that he needed actually a bit further. For some reason, they then dropped him back to Uttoxeter at 20 furlongs. And I watched this race before tipping in this race, and he was visibly kind of outpaced. He travelled well just behind the leaders, but then failed to pick up when asked. And then, so you've got an unexposed horse, and I'm asking, what is the horse doing differently? Well, he now runs over the furthest that he's run over fences, 24 furlongs in heavy. It's going to really test stamina, and it could be that this horse is a proper stayer, and that's going to unlock a load of potential. Also at a galloping track. with a long home straight, plenty of time to wind up. Those are the reasons why he could improve. We've got the trainer in red hot form. You've got an unexposed horse who is in form. There's a reason why he should improve today. He's being stepped up in trip. He could be anything. His handicap mark hasn't moved. He could be way ahead of the handicapper if these race conditions unlock the key. We've got the context that the majority in this race have been there old timers. And it's a pretty piss poor race, excuse my language, with plenty of horses actually that aren't in form or that have old legs or that aren't fit, etc. I've simply bottled it at 4-1. My starting point when going to bet in this race was actually to put a point or a point and a half on him at 4-1, and I talked myself out of it. I talked myself into some bigger priced horses. There's lessons there that I need to learn, but he ticked every box you want to be ticked for a short price horse, really. I had no issues about the ground. He looked like he would stay. He looked like he would improve further for it. All that context of who he's up against. The trainer in red hot form. The only niggle was the weight, but at 4-1, actually, given the context of this race, it was probably built into it. The final thing was pace, I suppose, and he, where was he? Well, he kind of had been held up and tracked the pace. Richard Johnson is a more aggressive rider, and if in doubt, you can probably assume that he's going to be more aggressive on a horse. And he actually did track the pace here. He just tracked the leaders in second or third, and that's an idea that thinking about the jockey, the type of jockey it is, will they be more aggressive on a chaser? And he had a bit of pace to track. I'll put my teeth back in. So that's that. 2 more to go as I tick round to 40 minutes, but I hope you're enjoying it. This is like a feature-length film. I don't think we'll win or be nominated for any Oscars. Haydock, the Peter Marsh Chase. I'm just going to pause this quickly while I have a drink. Hold on a second. I'm back. Right, the Peter Marsh Handicap Chase. So here's some examples of what did I get wrong. 2 things. One, I convinced myself and blinkered myself that I want a been there and done it horse. It's heavy ground. I want a horse that's stayed. I want a horse that's definitely handled heavy. And I will exclude looking at every other horse that as yet hasn't done this, and I'll just kind of ignore them. Any of you who watched the video preview of this, I mean, this was a bad error because I didn't even mention the winner. I was that blinkered on that type of been there and done it profile. I didn't even consider the Dutchman, and the Dutchman is exactly the sort of horse I would consider if he hit some of my trainer stats in the members post, because I have a slightly different set of eyes or an approach which I need to start to think about a bit more in handicap chases, where I do try and focus on unexposed horses that are doing something different and as yet may not have run in race conditions, and that being a reason for why they should improve. I'll get on to the Dutchman in a moment. So I was blinking about wanting a been there and done it horse, and I was quite comfortable ignoring Petit Zig, line through pretty quick. Carol's Destria line through pretty quick. Rock the Casbah wasn't proven to stay, certainly in this ground, wasn't proven to like heavy. He'd been pulled out on the ground, was deemed too heavy in the Welsh National, combined with the trip, and he'd been off 98 days, and the stats for horses in this race, kind of with only 1 run in the last, well, no run, excuse me, in the last 90 days was poor. That was context of price. He was only kind of 6-1. Happy to ignore. Yalarenki was there, kind of lurking. Captain Redbeard was 7-1 in the morning. I didn't think would be good enough. I thought there'd be a classier horse here, having gone up, but I mentioned him as being a good each way bet, and he did actually come second. Fine Rightly was fine, had some interesting back form. I threw half a point on him at 25s. He cruised into it a couple from home, and either found Zilch, didn't stay, or he just doesn't find anything now. Walk in the Mill had the ground to prove and stamina, and at a single figure price I was happy to leave. Hainan, I was blinkered on him as a horse, and I don't have a problem with backing him, and I probably would tip him again. Putting 2 points on him, a bit like Rathlin Rose, in hindsight was a bit foolish, and actually blinkered me from giving any other horse in this a kind of more of a chance. I probably would tip him again at 6-7-1, but make sure it's 1 point and see if there are any bigger price horses that I could consider. In the end, he ran as if maybe not up to this level. Might be he needs half a mile further. He just looked like a plodder. I think he was actually flattered come the line because a few horses fell into a hole and he did just keep going, but he was fairly well stuffed. And this was quite a disappointing run, I thought. I expected a bit better, clearly, but one to keep on side because he clearly does handle a bog. Highland Lodge, I was happy to leave. Age, handicap mark, he's kind of aimed at Aintree. Tintern Theatre I was happy to leave at the odds because he was a complete unknown on heavy ground. Would he stay? Would he have the ability? I think he actually ran really well here, and I would put him in your notebooks because I think he cruised and travelled really well into it before the ground, which sapped his stamina and therefore affected his jumping, really got to him over the last 3 fences. But he moved into this like a really, really progressive chaser. Might have been the lightweight. But he has some ability, so keep an eye on him. I think he ran well. But again, that's about context of price. Forest is Eagles, I was kind of happy to leave. He was a single figure price in the morning. He had yet to prove he would stay at this trip. He won a really weak race at Bangor the race before where they dawdled and he dominated from the front. And Knock and Rawley, I was quite happy to leave at his age. Wasn't sure he wanted this. Wondered if he was being aimed at the Ida. And he's kind of just a really, really slow old boat. I did kind of think if everything fell into a hole, he might just keep going, but he was never high up on the list. So actually, I only kind of had at the odds, kind of Fine Rightly, Hainan were there. Yalarenki, I wasn't convincing myself on at the odds because of his recent form, but I thought he might run okay, which he kind of did to a point. But then we had the Dutchman, who I didn't really consider at all. I didn't look at him in the video. I would have glanced at him when analysing the race, but again, 2 sets of blinkers. One on wanting to been there and done it horse. One, the other set, double blinkers on Hainan and being focused. And I actually think I might have been a bit pissed off that I didn't back him when he absolutely hacked up at kind of 12-1 into 7s or whatever it was on his last run because I hate not backing a decent price Sue Smith, Danny Cook handicap chase that makes all. I always think they're a missed opportunity when that happens. So that's an interesting thing. Anyway, the Dutchman. I am going on. What do I want to say? There was a trainer form concern. This horse, though, was 12-14-1 in the morning, and he was backed into 6.5. So people clearly knew, and many of you out there, some of you watching this, will have backed him and give yourself a pat on the back. The trainer form was a niggle. Trainer form in January is a bit odd because it's that time of year where there's a lot of vaccinations and a lot of trainers ease off their horses over Christmas and then they suddenly bounce into form. Tizzard is one of those. Neil Mulholland, who I'll get onto into the final example in a minute, is another of those also. But the Dutchman. So I've had my blinkers on that I want a been there and done it horse. So, well, this horse, he's never been there and done it. I don't know he handles a heavy ground over this distance. I don't know if he's going to stay. What should I have looked at? And actually, what I'm about to say is the kind of thinking that has found me some decent price winners within my members club when tipped, horses that hit my stats and then that I looked at a bit deeper. Well, he is unexposed. That's the starting point. We have that hope and that faith that one day he is going to show more over fences or maybe even over hurdles, and one day he is going to prove himself to be fairly well handicapped, especially in fences, over fences, because he'd only had 6 runs. He'd only had 1 run in a handicap chase before this, so without doubt the handicapper hadn't had enough evidence to assess his ability. But we tick round. His best run, he won a novice hurdle in heavy ground. Now, novice hurdles, you can get away with not handling conditions because class can get you through. But certainly winning in a bog in a novice hurdle is no bad thing. And you certainly can't say after that win that he doesn't handle heavy. You'd have to side on the fact that, well, the soft, you'd go with soft looks okay until proven otherwise in handicap, say. Then he rode, and remember, he was with Stanley Thompson and hadn't, this was only his 3rd run for Tizzard as well. They clearly thought a bit of him. He ran in a grade 2 hurdle, a grade 1 hurdle at Aintree, back to good to soft where he won. So he's got ability. He's already won 2 races from his first 5 career starts. Track leaders led 3 out, so he actually had run aggressively. So he'd had some jumping experience and he had won over fences. Yes, it was a class 4 novice, but that should have been a positive. He ran at Kelso on goods to soft. looking, well, getting outpaced. I'd have to watch the video again, but you know, that's a decent race. You can see there it's produced future winners. Was a decent level, small field. Back dropped in trip. They kept messing around with his trip, but Old Grangewood, he'd done well. Again, 9 horses had come out of this race and won. 17 since had kind of placed, and one of those 8 wins is now the Dutchman. I think that will have been added to that total since then. But that was a decent race. Yeah, that Old Grain was only 5 horses there, so they've run 32 times between them and 9 wins. So you know, decent animals. Moved upside, travelling okay, went 4 out. I should have watched this video. Sandy Thompson pitched him into 24 furlongs on soft in a novice Grade 2 race. In touch, moved upsides, travelling okay when fell 4 out. So he was still bang there, looking like he was relishing the trip and relishing conditions. I didn't watch that video. That was lazy. Should have done and should have noted that more. Then he drops back to 16 furlong. They clearly can't work out what trip he wants, but it looks like he might be a stayer in the making. When you've got young horses winning over 16 furlongs, you'd like to think they would get further in time. And we've got evidence here. So if we go through, he then ran in a couple of novice races. He then runs his final race in the Class 2 handicap hurdle, 21 furlong, good to soft. They've probably gone too fast a pace. He's been chasing a completely different discipline for quite a while, rushed off his feet a bit, no doubt. He then moves to Colin Tizzard, which could be argued to be a trainer upgrade, but that might be a bit harsh on Sandy Thompson, who is a very, very good trainer in his own right. But at least Tizzard has more horses that he can judge his chasers against, and probably does have better facilities in truth. His first run of this season, maybe needing it. He comes a very decent second to Sam Spinner, who, as I speak and as I spoke before this race, was the favourite for the World Hurdle, or is the favourite for the World Hurdle. Look at the horse, you know, that form has stacked up. Decent horses that come out of that. It was a Grade 3 handicap hurdle. Over 23 furlongs in the slot. That was an evidence that he stayed, I think. He probably needed a run a tad as well, and it was evidence that he was kind of probably well handicapped. That did have some quality. It's a Grade 3 handicap hurdle, 16 runners, decent. He then ran at Cheltenham, didn't do too much. Maybe he bounced a bit. Maybe the yards horses were going off a bit. It wasn't awful. He wasn't tailed off, pulled up. But then he turns up at Haydock, 26 furlongs. Number one, it's the furthest he's ever gone over fences. I didn't ask myself, could he improve for this new stamina test? 2, could he be fit? Well, he would be fit. This is his 3rd run of the season. It's his 3rd run for the yard. Harry Cobden's on for the first time. I didn't think about a possible change in tactics because he is inexperienced. He has raced prominently over fences before. Will they suddenly run him more prominently? He clearly had a bit of class, but he was a complete unknown. I could have got to myself to the point where I thought he really could be anything as a chaser, and he really could be anything as a staying chaser. And I have already, in the context of I've already discounted quite a few horses in this race at the odds that I was quite happily to dismiss. 2, Blinkerdon Heynan. I should have maybe said, what if he runs a rubbish race? What if he doesn't win? Think again. Who do you want to be with? And I didn't ask that question. Who is in the race the unexposed, really exciting horse? And without doubt, the Dutchman is the only horse in this race who had that could be anything really, really exciting profile that as yet we might not have seen the best of him over fences, and therefore he could be well handicapped. He also had a lightweight, which I should have thought about even more, again in an absolute slog. It was Haydock, been raining forever. It was biblical, so that should have been thought about. So all those things, yes, you can then put yourself off with trainer form. Maybe he was only 1-2 from 50 going into this, 1 from 25 or so in the last 14 days. But it's that funny time of year again, and it all comes down to the odds. He was 14 to 1 or so, I think, generally in the morning. That is a price in a race like this with 13 runners where you can forgive plenty and live in hope that there may be more to come. So plenty of things there that I can learn, take away, and think about linking to those first few points. Now, finally, as I tick round to 53 minutes, it's nearly going to be an hour long, isn't it? The final example, I didn't tip in this race on the blog. I did tip Coolmers Hill in the members post because, well, both him and Mount Oliver hit my trainer stats, and I've been drawn in again, but he was unexposed, so not so bad. He was 6-1, but a case of maybe I should have backed both, or certainly considered the other one in more depth again. He was unexposed. He came here in form. He wasn't really doing anything different, actually. I'm trying to ask the question: why should he have improved on that last Fontwell run? Well, he might be fit, though. He might be better for heavy ground, but that was a bit dubious. Um, and I didn't consider his massive weight in this because clearly he hadn't proven that he could carry weight yet, although he ran well at Fontwell. But this was this was a slog. Quagmire, even more testing. So in my head, that should have been there. But I'm not annoyed I tipped him as such at 6-1. I'm more annoyed that I did not even consider Mount Oliver, who was a qualifier against my trainer stats. And the first thing to say with this race is, again, he's like a poor man's the Dutchman, in the sense that we have a race here full of been there and done it horses generally, and quite a few. The context, if I click the Instant Expert tab, you can see here this is not a race packed full of been there and done it horses. Is what I was meant to say. Sorry, I'm confusing the different examples in my head. There are not many in here that have definitely proven themselves in conditions, which could mean it's open to a horse who is a bit different, who has a different profile. So in this example, you've got no horses that really stand out on form in heavy. Goring one looked interesting, but was £6 above his last winning mark. It was just an interesting race that had a bit more of an open feel about it, and races that have a bit of an open feel about it, you can be more forgiving of certain horses. Now, maybe I wouldn't have got myself into position to tip this, and maybe looking at this type a bit more and wanting to tip them might actually lose me more points over time. I don't know. It's something for me to ponder. But this horse was really could be anything. I mean, literally could be anything. We had no evidence that he did not handle heavy ground. He was 200-1 in the chase here, so ignore that. It's his third run for Mulholland as well. That's something to note down, isn't it? Dutchman was third run for Tizzard. This one was third run for Mulholland. Let's do third run for Trainer. With a trainer change, I am actually making a note that's just popped into my head. That's something I'll dive in Horse Race Base at and have a look at maybe. So we had here a horse that had been running on good to firm, and suddenly they run him on heavy. Now, my original thinking was, oh, they've run him on heavy ground here. I don't know, he's not going to, he might hate it, which he might do. But it's a complete unknown. Why would they run him on the ground? They wouldn't want to ruin the horse. I didn't think that, oh, the trainer actually might think he likes it. And actually, if it was too bad and they didn't think the horse would cope with it, would they pull him out? They'd probably make him a non-runner. And the fact they hadn't should maybe have been of some interest. It could be that he actually hated decent ground, and heavy ground is what he wanted all the time. It was also the furthest that he'd ran ever within over fences and in his life. He had 87 days off, which was interesting. It was that kind of break that makes you think, have they tinkered with something? Have they done something? Is there something there which, it's an interesting period of rest, is what I'm saying. And there's a reason that they might have done something, he might suddenly improve. I think this was just before the wind. Oh no, it was after the wind surgery kind of symbol, so he didn't have his wind done. Tom Scudamore was booked. The thing I didn't think about in this was, again, more rain, really heavy. Consider a horse that's got nothing on his back, and this horse had nothing on his back. His speed rating was okay. There was a few other pointers. Mulholland's form was a bit iffy, but he had the odd place horse, I think. But the other thing, the final thing, having said all that, other than him being the one really interesting horse in this race who really could be anything, who had a lightweight on his back, was Mulholland. And this is what I did not look at. I had my own stats with all of his runners at the course in handicaps, as you can see here. He does pretty well in handicaps, especially handicap hurdles. The market still doesn't seem to have cottoned on these stats for the last 5 years. So, note that down yourself. Mulholland handicappers at Fontwell. But the thing I didn't look at, and I should have done, was class. And that's pretty good in handicap chases. That includes Mount Oliver. But before this, he was 6 from 17, 8 places, 50% win and place, or nearly, in Class 5 handicap chases at Fontwell. Maybe that should have tipped me over the edge. The final thing I want to mention about that is Mulholland is a big, big yard. Well, growing, not massive yard, but he's decent size. Has eyes on improving the quality. Why would he keep what seemed a moderate Class 5 handicapper if he didn't think he could get wins out of them? And he was clearly thought he could, and he did. So there's a few things there. I'm maybe not annoyed so much that I didn't tip him. I didn't give him as much attention as I should have, and he was an example of a complete been there and done it horse against a load of horses which were quite a bit more exposed, but even they hadn't proven themselves in conditions that might not actually like them at all. So the race was there to be won by something doing a bit different that might actually relish heavy and might actually be thrown in and have a lightweight on their back. Tom Scudamore was on as well. So as I tick around the 59.5 minutes, they are the 4 examples. I know that's been quite a long video, but you know, I've said what I wanted to say. Hopefully, though, that first half of the video is first third of the video is interesting. There's plenty there. The purpose of this is for my own benefit, I suppose, as much as anything else, and obviously wanted to give you something interesting to watch and think about and apply to your own racing, maybe. Hopefully, there is something within all of that that I've just said that you've noted down that you might think about. Maybe if you take one thing away from this video, if you wanted to improve your racing and to focus on one area or two, maybe. One, look at handicap chasers that won last time out and use that as a starting point for finding bets. You won't go too far wrong. Not systematically, but as a starting point for further analysis. Handicap chasers that won last time out and that ran within the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks. There's a kind of signal for you. Yeah, handicap chasers won last time out, ran within the last kind of 20 days. Have a look, take note. And use that as a starting point. And secondly, always ask that question: what is the horse doing differently? Is the horse unexposed? Are they a could be anything horse? Those 2 things to apply to all of your betting, maybe, and not just handicap chasers, might be something of note. So there, all those things are things I need to absorb into my brain. I need to apply. I need to think about all those things on that original list at the start of this video, which you can find below this video. All those things I've got to improve on and try and drive up my profit levels in 2018 on the free tips and drive up my winning strike rate. And I love the idea that that's a challenge because I'm a restless perfectionist. I want to get better. And hopefully this time next year I will have, and it will be a sorry state if I hadn't. I need to work harder, and that is what I will be doing. Because I like solving the puzzle and I like being right and I hate being wrong. That is the drive, whether I bet £2, £10 or £20 on a horse. That's what I kind of bounce out of bed for, to attack such challenges, which is rather sad, but you know, it's quite fun having a hobby which keeps you engaged all of the time. So that's that. Thanks for watching. I hope you found that useful. That is the longest video I think I've ever recorded. If you've stuck with it to the end, then thank you. I hope there's something of interest there. Do post a comment below. Any questions? If you thought I've talked absolute nonsense about something, if you think I've missed something glaring, if you have your own successful approach and things that you look at or ways into racing, share them. Let's get a discussion going on the comments in the comments below. But yes, all that leaves me to say is thanks for watching. Happy punting. Good luck with all your bets moving forwards. And until the next time, this is Josh saying bye for now.